All right, we'll call to order the City Council special meeting agenda for Monday, April the 28th, 2025 at 4 o'clock p.m. Roll call and certification of quorum. Madam Secretary has certified that we have a quorum present with all members with the exceptions of member Koza and Patel. Koza's in the building somewhere because I see his truck. So I'm sure he'll come in here in just a few minutes. With that, we'll move to move forward to number 3, citizens' comments. There were no citizens' comments turned in. So with that, we'll move to new business, council input and discussion regarding fiscal year 2026 budget and council priorities. Trent, turn it over to you guys.
Thank you, Mayor, and good afternoon, Council. This is really following on upon our work we did in our strategic priority session held February 1st of this year. So this is really our second major meeting to develop our budget for fiscal year 26. Our departments and our budget team have been hard at work developing projections, not only for the remainder of this fiscal year, but also developing our FY26 budget based upon those strategic priorities and associated milestones from our strategic planning sessions. So tonight, we're going to kick things off by covering municipal budgeting overview that sets the stage for the general municipal budgeting as well as the way we do budgeting here at City of Pearland. Then we'll have an update on the FY25 budget, where we are today, and the process of closing out that year. And then update on FY26 budget development, including some of the funding pressures we're looking at, the priorities, some of the budgeting challenges, some of the evaluation of service delivery and different funding sources we've been looking at to help out our general fund. And then some of the new things we'll be rolling out with the 26 budget that'll give some more transparency to that, to the council as well as the public. Then we'll go into our mid-range financial planning, which was developed in support of our strategic priority of resilient finances. And then we'll look at some additional future factors, and then get into council input and discussion of priorities based on what we've seen here tonight and the overall general budget discussion. Then we'll walk through some future dates for budget development. As you all are aware of, we've revised our budget schedule for this year to accelerate all of the funds but the general fund before we have the final tax valuation numbers, so that we can take the budget down in smaller bites, and then when we get to that final general fund budget that we have to wait on those valuation numbers for, we've got less information put in front of you that we have to get back and discuss in short order. So at this point, I'm going to introduce Ms. Rachel Winslow, our Office of Management and Budget, the head of OMB, and she's going to walk us through the discussion tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Epperson. Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Thank you for your time. Today we'll start with a brief municipal budgeting overview. The types of budget that we want to discuss today are the operational budget and the CIP budget. There's an operational budget, which is our financial plan for a single fiscal year, starting with the proposed budget that indicates an operational plan developed by our departments and presented by the city manager to city council for consideration and approval. The council then approves the adopted operating budget, which includes any modifications, and that becomes the operating guide for the fiscal year. The CIP budget is a 5-year plan which addresses development and improvements to the city's infrastructure. And the first year of this plan is adopted with the operating budget, while the final 4 years are forecast. The different budget methods that can be used to develop an operating budget are shown above. The City of Pearland uses a hybrid approach, which includes traditional line item-based budgeting as well as priority-based budgeting. There are different fund types that make up the overall operating budget, including governmental funds, which are funds through which most governmental functions of the city are financed, proprietary and enterprise fund, operations that are financed in a manner similar to a private business, and fiduciary funds, which are restricted. Governmental type funds include the general fund, debt service fund, special revenue funds, such as our Hot Peg Park Development and other funds, and capital project funds include the general fund and water wastewater funded capital improvements. Proprietary funds include the city's enterprise fund as well as internal service funds. Enterprise funds resemble business-type activities and are rate supported, while our internal service funds provide support to city operations and are funded by transfers from those operating departments. These include the motor pool, facilities, and IT funds. Fund restrictions by type are shown above. General fund is able to support the most activities, while proprietary and special revenue funds can fund activity for which the revenue is brought in. Debt and capital funds can expense related to debt and capital projects, but not any operating costs. And the city of Pearland balances these restrictions to make the most use we can out of all the revenue sources in order to maintain property tax and water rates responsibly. So for our fiscal year 25 budget update, as part of managing the operational budget, there are 2 annual budget adjustments. In May, we will be bringing forward fiscal year 25 budget amendment 2 to council for consideration. During budget kickoff this year, we recognized with our departmental partners underutilization of budgeted funds. So over a period of the last 3 years, we recognized budget dollars that were budgeted but not utilized by the time the fiscal year ended. These dollars drop to fund balance. However, it takes another budget cycle before we can utilize those. So departments were made aware of this trend and asked to examine their budgets at Budget Amendment 2 to recognize potential savings prior to the end of the fiscal year so that they could be plugged into organizational needs and priorities prior to the next budget cycle. Departments responded well and are looking at their different programs and services that they could remove or reduce in order to recognize cost savings. Examples of known savings we have found in fiscal year 25 include the reduction in printing costs for our annual report, as well as Pearland in Motion, which will be primarily online and a smaller number printed. These reductions will be reflected in Budget Amendment 2 and in fiscal year 26 going forward. Other savings are the result of our Position Review Committee. During the fiscal year, departments initiate requests to review and make use of vacant positions. Through the Position Review Committee, departments reevaluate the need for existing city positions that can be vacant or better utilized, and many departments have been able to fulfill staffing needs through this process instead of having to ask for additional positions at the new budget year. As departments work on their FY25 projections, they're also updating their fiscal year 26 requests, and the fiscal year 26 budget is still in development. Some of the funding pressures and priorities that are being considered as the development of the budget is ongoing include the following. Positions that were partially funded in fiscal year 25, positions that started in January or later have an additional impact on fiscal year 26, as they will be budgeted for a full 12 months versus the 6 to 9 in fiscal year 25. The Coronavirus Relief Fund has a non-reimbursable expenses that will need to be covered by the general fund. After the appeals process was complete, efforts were made to begin making this fund whole with Budget Amendment 2, and those efforts will continue with Budget Amendment 2, and if not fully resolved, continue into fiscal year 26. In fiscal year 25, we received an additional new fire apparatus, which helps maintain our heavy apparatus fleet. In order to continue maintaining the fleet, we must assess additional lease fees to the new fire truck to incorporate it in the motor pool fund, so the apparatus can be replaced at the end of life. Due to the high replacement costs of the heavy apparatus, lease fees are estimated to increase $275,000 annually to be reflected in the transfers out to motor pool and fire operations. Due to the number of heavy apparatuses on order, we expect to incorporate a minimum of 1 additional heavy apparatus lease fee for fiscal year going forward. Additional funding pressures include meeting the police take-home vehicle policy and additional funding to the Infrastructure Reinvestment Fund for street work seen in the Internal Infrastructure Reinvestment Fund, as well as funding the internal service funds fully so that IT and facilities have capital replacement capabilities. Additional fiscal year 26 challenges and unknown include how to find resources for departments that don't often get resources, as well as unknown factors at this time that we know will have an impact. Currently, Meet and Confer is ongoing, as well as additional citywide compensation considerations. Economic conditions continue to be monitored for their impact on sales tax, development, and other factors. And then we must consider unknown factors that will come up at a later time. In addition to reviewing the cost of departmental expenditures during the fiscal year 25 budget, there are also alternative service delivery methods currently under evaluation. These are additional programs or services or reimagining of services that could result in savings. First is the Trap, Neuter, and Return program, and if completed by the City of Pearland Resources, this requires 2 additional full-time animal control officers as well as equipment and supplies. However, if managed by an outside nonprofit, there would be no reoccurring personnel costs, but existing staff would need to support it. An additional program includes FEMA lot mowing, which could be outsourced to a company who would then seek to sell carbon credits to other companies. This could allow for the city to save money on its existing mowing contracts. Additional evaluation is ongoing for our unemployment costs and transit services. To best utilize our resources, revenue sources are evaluated to see if expenses are eligible out of those funds, and this includes our hot PEG and PEDC funds when applicable. Other evaluations of programs and the value of outsourcing or cost sharing are evaluated by our departmental users throughout the year. Here we want to recognize some of the other revenue source evaluation that is ongoing. In our hot fund, we examine that for sports, tourism, capital expenditures, and enhancements that would be eligible out of that program. In our PEG fund for fiscal year 26, we anticipate funding our city website update as well as a customer experience platform. The PEDC fund continues to fund 20% in infrastructure contributions. From TERS sourcing, we're looking at our street and sidewalk infrastructure, additional park infrastructure, land acquisition, and public facility development. The Park Development Fund is usually used for capital replacements, and our Tree Trust Fund can be utilized for landscaping and parkland projects. Also new for 2026 are some additional input items. And we're moving forward with web-based tools that will allow for additional engagement throughout the budget process. This begins with Balancing Act, which is a web-based budgeting scenario tool. It allows to look at different revenue and expense changes and what the impact could be on the operational budget. Users will be able to select to increase or decrease different levers and see how that would impact the different budget scenarios. And the tool will be available in early August with the release of the proposed general fund budget. Revenue will be sorted by type, while expenses will be sorted into the strategic priority they are associated with, mirroring our budget presentation for fiscal year 26. Prior to the full budget development, users will have access to a web-based prioritization tool. There will be 2 scenarios, one for general fund and one for enterprise fund. Users will be able to view a series of departmental funding requests for new programs and services and then rank the requests up to a specific dollar threshold. We expect this tool to be available in June. When submitted, the Office of Management and Budget will be able to review and summarize these results. Resources will be allocated as funding allows and in line with the strategic priorities, and the final result of the proposed budget will be reflected when submitted. This is a screenshot of what Balancing Act looks like initially. There's a pop-up message that tells you the goal of the tool and the guidelines for use. Each revenue source is expandable, but only some will have levers that you can impact. expenditure categories will be expandable and users will be able to select increases and decreases on specific items. Not shown is a running revenue versus expense toolbar that lets you know if your budget is balanced or not. And we anticipate presenting a scenario that applies to the general fund for users, including the public, to test. And while this is a great tool to see what impact different changes could have on the proposed budget, will not impact the final proposed budget submitted by the city manager, and any changes to the proposed budget would require consensus from council. This tool will only reflect if the budget is balanced, and it does not consider things like 90-day policy minimums. Above is an example of another community's prioritization exercise. So the function is the same. Different categories of strategic priorities and additional services or programs are shown. Participants can then see a short title and expand for a short summary, as well as the anticipated costs. They can then select from the options available until they reach a dollar threshold. In the example shown, it's $700,000. There will be more options shown than funding available, which is the same challenge that we go through for our annual budget development. A short welcome message is included, which gives some information about the process, and a yes/no question to the participant asking if they're a resident. We intend to use this tool internally as well as make it public-facing prior to the proposed budget. Again, there will be two possible scenarios, one for enterprise fund and one for general fund. Responses will be compiled and shared with the CMO for consideration, but the ultimate decision will be made based on funding availability and need. Next, we have 4 different scenarios for our mid-range financial planning. As we go through these, there are multiple factors that can impact and influence any budget year. Behind each of the 4 scenarios, these are the consistent assumptions going forward, which is that there are no elimination of services or service improvements unless noted. The forecasted growth for the expenditure categories, when not specified, matches a 3-year trend. And for fiscal year 25 revenue, only our sales tax revenue has been adjusted from Budget Amendment 1 to reflect our actuals for the year, and we didn't address any of the other revenue sources that may change with Budget Amendment 2. Each scenario assumes for $160 million in new property assessed value for each scenario in each fiscal year. In scenario 1, this shows property tax growth from new value only. The changes in expenditures reflect 4% change in salary and wage expense, which is no additional positions and only anticipated step increases, which is 3% salary increase for our uniform public safety staff and 2% salary increases for non-uniform public safety staff. A 7.5 transfer out expense increase, which includes that additional fire heavy apparatus lease fee and the additional increases we associate with lease fees for vehicles. It includes our current estimate for the CIP O&M expenses for parks, streets, and drainage projects, which is estimated to be $140,000 in fiscal year 26. This scenario includes new property tax revenue from MUD 16 and $500,000 in annual tax revenue from new construction. Sales tax revenue in this scenario stays flat from fiscal year 26 to 28, and as a result, the fiscal year 26 forecast includes finishing 0 days over policy with $3,601 remaining. In scenario 2, this includes moderate property tax revenue increase and some sales tax growth. Here we're forecasting 6% salary and wage increase, which is 5% for salary and benefit increases and 1% for assumed new positions. So this includes the same 7.5% transfer out increase, as well as an additional $300,000 annual expense or increased contribution to the Infrastructure Reinvestment Fund. The same scenario for the capital improvement plan. In this scenario, revenue changes include a 4% property tax revenue increase, which is inclusive of MUD 16, and the annual tax revenue increase associated with new construction. It additionally includes 2% sales tax revenue growth from the fiscal year 25 projected budget. In this scenario, we finished 0 days over the 90-day policy minimum, in 2026, with $26,937 above policy minimum. In scenario 3, we're anticipating a 6% overall change in salary and wages, so this is inclusive of benefits, as were all the prior scenarios. This includes new salaries and wages and assumes new staff in fiscal year 26. Beginning in fiscal year 27, this also includes the staff for the anticipated fire station number 7, funded fully by the city. 7.5% transfer out increase and an additional, which is inclusive of an additional $500,000 for the infrastructure reinvestment fund in each fiscal year. The capital improvement plan O&M expenses remain consistent. Here we see 5% property tax revenue growth inclusive of MUD 16 and 3% sales tax revenue growth from the fiscal year 25 projected. Continue to finish 0 days over the 90-day policy minimum, but with $62,444 above the policy minimum. And then in scenario 4, this is 6% salaries and wages increase holistically, including anticipated new staff in fiscal year 26 and in 27, inclusive of the staff for Fire Station 7. 7.5% transfers out increase and an additional $500,000 for the infrastructure reinvestment fund in each fiscal year. CIP O&M expenses remain consistent. We see 6% property tax revenue growth and 3% sales tax revenue growth from the fiscal year 25 projected, which allows us to finish 1 day over the policy minimum, or $525,000. There are always a number of revenue factors and expenditure factors that can go into any scenario, so we simply picked 4 of them to illustrate. A common theme across all 4 are the out years, and so I'm going to turn it back over to Mr. Epperson to talk about additional future factors that can impact those future years.
Thank you, Ms. Winslow. So just some of the additional future factors we want to put in front of you. You're aware of many of these, but just put them in context with the budget. Of course, additional property development, commercial and residential. We make assumptions that you saw on growth in the different scenarios. But depending on how things go and how things progress and the timing, we could see some significant commercial and residential development that is in the pipeline start to impact us positively in the future. But timing is going to be key on some of that. And obviously, some of those big ones are from a residential standpoint, Massey Oaks and that general area. And then in the lower Kirby area, we've got a lot of different projects under construction and looking to see when those get completed and occupied. We also have several in the State Highway 35 corridor from a commercial standpoint. And then, of course, we've got the Pelican project and the Rockefeller project as well that'll be coming in the future, bringing significant new value on the ground. And then legislative changes. Obviously, every 2 years we go through a legislative session. I believe we're somewhere in the ballpark of 9,000 bills filed this session that may impact municipalities, 8,000.
And just to put that in context, 25% of them are aimed at municipalities.
Yeah, so 25% of those aimed directly at us, usually not in a good way. So some of those things that we're taking a look at and seeing where they go is, as you're aware, when we calculate the tax rate every year, we run it through the tax rate worksheet. Anytime we are below the voter approved rate, it creates unused increment that we can carry forward for 3 years to use in the future. There's a bill out there that would eliminate any unused increment. So what we have out there potentially goes away from the last 3 years, and we have a significant amount from 3 years ago that this will be our last year that that's available, from the year we had the tax rate calculation error. So that potentially goes away, and you are strictly at that point limited to the 3.5% plus new value. There's also a bill that's increasing from, I think, $2,500 to $250,000, the personal property tax exemption for commercial or businesses, which would potentially impact us. We saw the last session, there was a bill that passed that eliminated or reduced to zero the property tax, personal property tax on medical manufacturers and devices in those facilities. So obviously that impacted us in the lower Kirby area. This would further impact us. Of course, funding of capital projects, that's one of the latest ones that Joel and the mayor and team have been working on with the legislators, is that looking to limit the amount of debt we can have to 20% of our tax rate. Currently, it stands at about 45%. So that obviously in fast-growing communities that have lots of infrastructure needs could have a significant impact on us, as well as some restrictions on the use of certificates of obligation, where we use those on mostly now on our enterprise side, the water and sewer fund, because they have the lower borrowing cost and also the lower requirements on reserve. So if that's eliminated there and we have to go back to revenue bonds, could have a significant impact on the water and sewer rates for our citizens. So working on all those to limit the impacts they have on us, but knowing that some of those will probably make it through this process. Then the other thing, and we'll evaluate this every year from here on out until the end of the TERS, but TERS 2 coming to an end in 2029. There is some additional capacity within the TERS based on the growth. And so we're working on a potential list of projects that would, we could look at another TERS amendment, have the TERS reimburse the city for those costs and get those off of our, where we're not funding those either through the general fund or through our debt fund. And then also taking a look at the end of TERS 2 and how that impacts us from a tax rate. And so what we started this past year was when we ran our tax rate worksheet that we obviously used for setting the tax rate and working through the budget process. We ran an alternative one that looked at if the TERS had ended last year and how did that impact us. And you know, the big impact is it'll have a good positive impact on our debt service rate. It's just we've got to make sure when that happens that we don't have any significant or problems on the operating side of things. We believe the mechanisms within the tax rate worksheet as it stands today and our balance of debt service rate to operating rate in our tax rate means that we won't, it should not impact us significantly, but we'll continue to monitor that as we work towards the end of the TERS. So we do know what that looks like when it does end. Since that is such a large piece of our assessed value, and then the administrative fee that comes back to us all goes into the general fund. We want to make sure we understand how that impacts us. So just some future things there. So at this point, that concludes our presentation. We want to turn it over to council for discussion and input on the priorities. You see, as we walk through the different scenarios, we have to make a lot of assumptions as we put those together. And you know, the further we get down the road, you know, those assumptions can change depending on the economy. But through that, just want to be able to put a picture in front of you of if we do fund the priorities that we've talked about up to now, being putting more money in the infrastructure fund for the street program, bringing Fire Station 7 online in 2027, and beyond that, just some of those things that have been priorities, what those look like from an impact standpoint, and you know, how far do we want to go on those, and are there other priorities that we want to make sure we have in the budget and are funded as we move forward. So with that, Mayor, I'll turn it back over to you, Council.
Good deal. A couple comments from myself as well as some questions, and we'll turn it over to Council. Just real quick, slide 11 would be a great slide to just kind of keep it talks about how we do an ongoing evaluation of people, ongoing evaluation of expenses. Is this needed? You know, for example, savings found, annual report printing / Pearland in motion printing. You know, that's an example of, you know, probably outdated, not necessarily needed, and yet, you know, we can eliminate that and save that money. That's an example of, you know, this is just a great slide that just shows that's an ongoing process. When somebody leaves, you know, we have a position open. Is this position absolutely necessary? Can we absorb it? You know, those questions get asked and answered internally, which we would hope we would do that pretty much across the board. You know, from my standpoint, I think we have some must-haves or must things we have to look at, and that is the voter-approved projects. But outside that, given at least between now and June, we don't really know what's going to happen to us legislatively. So I would caution us from being too aggressive on budget. I would probably lean towards being a little lean, and just so we know what's going to happen until we know exactly what's going to happen coming out of legislative session. This session has probably been the most aggressive towards cities. The sad thing is most of the cities that are being targeted are the big five, and yet we're all grouped in with it. But having said that, that just means we need to be forever, you know, cautious and looking at how we do things. I mean, there's even talks from the governor. I don't think it's in necessarily bills that will go anywhere, but that's this session. What's going to happen 2 years from now? You know, one, even if you go over no new revenue, you got to take that to the vote of the people. And, you know, it just leaves you zero room for trying to figure out to run your city. No one size city fits all. Yet at the legislature, you know, that's kind of where they are. So my advice and my comments and my 2 cents is I would be looking at this as lean as possible with the voter approved projects, you know, kind of at the top of the list until we know more about what the legislative session is going to do to us. And one quick question: when do we expect preliminary values? I know it's late April. Normally, we start seeing, you know, things here in the next
April
couple of days.
30th, Brazoria County is releasing their
So a couple of days. That's the big one. Obviously, Harris County and Fort Bend County are much smaller, but Brazoria County is the big one. So you said later this week, Rachel? Okay, good deal. I'll turn it over to council for questions, comments, and input. Ms. Chavaria?
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you so much for the presentation. So it looks like the preliminary suggestions for infrastructure reinvestment is between 300 to 500,000. So in 2016, the PCI report stated we should invest 3.6. The 2024 states 5.9. So we're nowhere near that amount. So I just like to see, I understand that we need to be lean, I get that, but how we can get a little bit closer to that gap.
So just to clarify what was in the presentation, so the budget for a couple of years has been about 1.3 million. So this would be the 1.3 plus either the 300 or the 500, and then we would add another 300 or 500 the following year and the following year. So it really grows it from 1.3 to 1.6, then to 1.9, then or if it's a 500, 1.3 to 1.8, and then to 2.3, and keep adding that additional 500 each year.
Okay, well, that makes sense.
So that gets us there eventually. I know it doesn't get us there immediately, but it's a kind of a step to getting there.
So one more question. So I would like to see a scenario of a 3% and also 5%. So we go from 4% salaries to 6%. So is there something in between? Yeah. Yes.
If I could piggyback off Councilmember Cervera's question, where are we with the 20% of the EDC fund for infrastructure? What projects are you not considering that 20% in your? So what projects are we doing on that?
Sure. So the 20% is assumed. And I believe we actually, through this current fiscal year, Matt's here, we're well above the 20%, and I think they're looking at adding additional projects in their proposed budget for 26 that would keep them well above the 20%. Matt?
So this year, we should be probably bringing you here in the next couple months to award the Industrial Drive West project. And then we'll also be bringing you to be in the design and engineering of NAP and also the design and engineering of Shank. So those are the next three projects.
So Matt, roughly what's the cost? I'm just curious.
You know, we added in year 5 Industrial Drive East, and so that put us up to $33.7 million for the 20%, and that was actually 40% of our sales tax, because the problem is the projects we identified are all coming in a lot more expensive than what we initially had when we first started talking about this.
Thank you so much.
And I might just add on top of that, you know, their projects that we're looking at are projects that we can completely rehab or recapitalization, you know, taking an asphalt road and making it concrete. The other side of the budget is more rehab and maintenance and ongoing maintenance, pothole repair, those types of things. A little bit different, but certainly when you add it all together, it's quite a bit.
And Mayor, too, the other one I'd mention, obviously you approved the design contract for Frugier and Hooper the other day, and I bet you Frugier West has the worst PCI index of any street in the city of Pearland. So in addition to this, we're also financing the roads that are being done in other parts of the community that are also going to improve that PCI.
So
Any other questions, comments?
I want to clarify real quick. There was a question about the 5% on the salary. So in scenario 2 and scenario 3, and I think that follows through on 4, is that's a 6% overall. So that assumes, I believe, a 5% for salary and benefits, and then there's 1% in there for potential new positions.
No, I understand that.
Okay.
What was scenario 1?
Scenario 1 was 4% on salary and wages.
So 3.
With no
You're
new,
saying do it 2.
Yeah, with no new positions.
With what for salary increase for non-uniform? So 3 and 5. Okay. 3 and
I mean, that really boils down to it's like step increases for everyone that's on a step plan.
Okay. Any other questions, comments? Mr. Suman? Oh, real quick. Go ahead.
No,
Go ahead, Ms. Cade. Go ahead. Ms. Cade?
Sorry.
It's okay.
On the police take-home vehicles on slide 13, I think, kind of tiny. Where are we on that? How many vehicles short are we? Trent, Chief, whoever.
Chief, you got that handy? I know they shared an email with me, but I don't have it memorized yet. Chief?
I actually do have it, so I'm sorry. They're short about 10 patrol vehicles and 3 unmarked vehicles.
10 and 3?
10 and 3.
Okay.
So that's $700,000. Is that about right?
Yeah, roughly.
By the time you outfit them, too.
Okay, and then on slide 14, I had one question also. On there, it says challenges, how do we fund resources for departments that struggle to compete for resources? Did you expand on that? And I missed it, or
Sure.
could you?
So I'll ask Ms. Capers to forgive me for bringing her department up specifically in this area, but Parks Department has grown significantly over the years, and it's not just in the amount of fields, but it's in the space they program, it's the things they manage, and in their administration office, they've asked for many, many years for some additional capacity there to help the business operations of the Parks Department. And it's, unfortunately, it's been one of those areas where every year as we're budgeting and we're making those final adjustments and final cuts, and we're weighing the priorities and the public safety request and the other requests we have, and we haven't funded to help them out in that area. So it's kind of it's not just in that area, but just, we've got departments that struggle to compete with resources because they're not public safety, they're not infrastructure. Every time we add people, every time we add, programs or the budget, add to our capital program, it impacts all of our internal service departments as well. So it's also, I would say that includes human resources, finance, facilities, all of those areas where, as we grow, you got to build a back house as well to be able to support all that. And they just, generally we struggle to get those funded year over year. So that's what that means. Thank you. That's a good question.
Thank you.
Mr. Tooman?
Can we go to slide 16? So this is a good list of funds that the city has, and not limiting to this, but with these funds, I think a good dive into actually what controls of these funds and where the money can be spent. I know some of these are controlled by our own city ordinances, and they were written many years ago. And so maybe looking into, what changes need to be made to the ordinance to implement better use of these funds. And then secondly, a lot of these funds, the balances are just building, and to also make sure that instead of letting the funds build, make sure that they are getting implemented and used in the general budget as we can, but also in the CIP budget, and not just building, but using them every choice that we can, every chance that we can. So that would be my 2 cents.
Absolutely. So I give Councilmember Tooman credit. He asked a great question probably a couple, 3 months ago about our buckets of money and all the details on what controls those. And so we've worked on that. We've got the general information all put together. We're trying to develop a way that impactfully can be presented and shared with everybody on council as well as the public, just so we understand what those buckets of money are, what the current restrictions are on those. What are those based in? Are those based in state law? Are they based on an ordinance? Is that ordinance based on a state law? And what can those things be used on? And that's really what this slide is about, is that we're evaluating those all the time and every year as we get into that. Can we expend those dollars to take any pressure off of the general fund? So we'll once we've got that wrapped up, we're going to be sharing that out to everybody.
Just to follow up on that, what you've prepared so far, I know it was a ton of work. Thanks for that, because it's very helpful with that.
Well, I think a great example, hot funds, PEG funds, I mean, they're very specific. And even within hot funds, the various categories from historical to arts and the like are very specific, and certain, I would say, auditing features that have to be done going back. I mean, Josh, and PEG funds, you might explain, there was a question about PEG funds just for the public in general. We have this up. Where does that money come from, and then how can it be spent?
Sure. Thank you, Mayor. So PEG funds are public information, education, and government funds that we get for the cable channel that we have. So every cable subscription within the city limits, there's a franchise fee that comes off and comes back to the city that helps fund the content that's then put back on those channels. The tricky part to that revenue source is that it can only be used for capital outlays that support the channel that have a shelf life over a year at the bare minimum. So things like the renovation of the train depot, which will create office space and studio space that then directly supports the PEG channel, is a great application. Our website's another great application, very expensive capital outlay, but everything that's on that website supports our cable channel, and we'll end up coming back around to that.
Just a great example of the limitations. We can't just put it in our general fund and use it for streets or police or fire. It varies specific in how it has to be used, and I'm quite sure we have to do an audit and a paper trail on how those monies are used. So any other questions, comments? Mr. Koza?
Along that line right there on the hot funds, have we ever, I know when we had our workshop a couple years ago, or discussion, whatever it was, I know the lobbyist had said that if we had ideas on being able to utilize those funds for, certain things, that we could discuss with him, and he would be willing to take the charge to have, because it kind of sounded like in that presentation, you can come up with ideas that are within the law to be able to suit your specific need. Have we ever entertained anything like that? Have we ever, what does it cost? What's the process? Do we know?
So, I recall the discussion and what was presented here. I don't know if that was in relation to if we've got any specific expenditures, we would have to go to the legislature, or it was just they would,
He
would
made a
evaluate
comment-
it to see if you
he
could
made
or
a
couldn't do
comment
that?
during the meeting that,
Sure.
that if we got with him, he'd be willing to take the charge if it fit the mold. And that's what I was just curious, because of the specificity of that fund and the expenditures.
Right.
He said that there is some expansion we can do if it fits the state, regs.
Right.
And I'm just asking, have we ever looked at that? Have we ever entertained it?
So we'll see if Victor or Tracy has anything to add to that, but I would think that might be something as we work through the Old Town revitalization, that there may be some opportunities we look at potentially there, if there is an ability to expand that. But we looked at or pursued any other.
Nothing specific, Mayor and Council. Obviously, we'd entertain any project that is fundable from hotel occupancy tax. The comment really was made that they're willing to support us in anything we can put forward that would meet the requirements of the legislation. So the obvious one to me, and it's on the screen, is sports tourism. So if there's a desire to invest in something further in that regard, we could certainly look at leveraging hot funds. Remembering, of course, that we do have an auditing requirement and would have to make sure that we can show that the funds have been used for the purpose for which the tax is collected.
You have an ROI on that one.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, he had, when he gave his presentation, he went through several different ones that weren't sports related, that were all over the map, that could, and he said, hey, this city came up to us and said, here's what we want to do. And we went down that path. And the next city said, here's what we'd like to do. And they were able to get it passed. And so what my question is, if we came up with ideas to do that, have we ever entertained it? Have we ever looked at, hey, here's another avenue that we can do with hot funds? We just have to take it through the process.
In the context of Old Town, I think there's potential to use hot funds there, and we've had that discussion at some of the public workshops in that regard. So yes, that's an obvious one that we could run with.
Okay, I mean, that's what because I mean, it is restrictive, and until we had that presentation, it seemed like every time I was asked, or I asked, can we do this, can we do that, it was no, 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 and I was like, okay, then why do we have it? I mean, that to me, that was a very enlightening conversation we had. So, at any rate, that was my comment on that. Also, as far as Mona's, was it 3 and 5? I think
3 and 5.
Well, yeah, 3 and 5. But I mean, it breaks down on the backside to 2. I'd be in support of that as well. So,
yeah, I think we ought to have that in our hip pocket, just given what the state legislature is doing. Not saying that that's where we go, but I think we've got to have that flexibility until sine die, June 2nd.
Yeah, well, I mean, just to be able to see
understand.
it. Just to be able to see it. I mean, that's...
See where they go. Yeah, I would be looking, with that, I'd be looking, as close to no new revenue as we can. Just where are we with that, and just so we know, what that is, and then is there anything else that gives us breathing room, above that. So just to be careful, at least from a planning standpoint, until we know our numbers. So, Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Mayor. If you go to slide 15, I think I'm in favor of most all of these. So thank y'all for bringing it to us. If there's anything else similar, I think we should make sure we've dug into all that. But I like all those that are listed.
Mr. Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I had a couple of questions. One was a clarity question on balancing act. I thought I heard you say that balancing act would not show if you were running over budget, but I thought the slide said that it did. So can I just
It will show your revenues versus your expenditures. What it won't be able to show the user is if you're within that 90-day policy. So it really just looks at your revenues above expenditures and tells you if you have a balanced budget. But in addition to our balanced budget, we also do have that 90-day fund balance minimum, which changes with your expenditures. So it's not able to reflect that.
Thank you for that clarity. Second question I had is what do we currently have in the tree fund?
Last time I'd looked or heard, it was about $1 million, just under.
Yeah, it's like
What I thought
1.2.
1.2.
1.2.
Thanks, Vance.
Thank you. And then my last question goes back to streets, and I'm glad to see that we're thinking about potentially putting 300, 500 on top of what we're already investing. And I believe I understood that the 1.3 that we have in our budget now, adding between 3 and 500 every year, is not accounting for what the EDC is putting in. That's separate from those dollars, correct?
The EDC, it does not include the EDC dollars. The EDC, those are typically reconstruction projects where we're taking an old asphalt road and converting that to concrete curb and gutter. The 1.3 plus either the 3 or 5 adding to that moving forward, that's really our asphalt program and our concrete panel replacement program. So that's really more of a rehab and keep the existing infrastructure in its current state. It's not a reconstruct or rebuild as we would do with the capital projects that EDC funds. So a little bit different type of program.
Right. So given that we're $4 million, $4.8 million annually behind on what we're putting into roads, is 300 to 500. I guess the crux of my question is that basically just keeping us the same distance away from where we need to be and accounting for inflation, or is that making any headway into that differential?
I think it would make headway. I mean, we're not, I don't think, seeing that type of inflation annually in the asphalt, the cost of that right now. Obviously, there's been inflation, but I think that would catch us. The 500, I think, would catch us up at some point. The 300 may be closer to. I mean, that would really string it out, and you'd probably be impacted, obviously, more by inflation with that.
That was kind of my thoughts as well. So, as we get into this, I would be certainly in favor of looking more to that heavier side so we can make up that ground sooner rather than later.
Yeah, what would be interesting is what we're doing in our current drainage program. On the back end of the majority of the drainage projects are some roadway, because we're going to be going into an area the roads are already impacted. We're updating, and so that's really going to make a big dent in a lot of our PCI, because those roads are impacted already. Right. It doesn't make sense for us to rehab a road and then turn right around and have trucks on it, with the drainage project. So I think, between now and 28, whatever time it is that we complete those projects will be beneficial. I raised this question internally with staff here a few months ago, and that is, in our CIP program, we call for a lot of these old county roads, veterans, as an example, McLean, Harkey, and the like. They're 2-lane, open ditch roads, and our CIP program has it, is to convert these to concrete curb and gutter, and the expense is in drainage. The expense is not the roadway. The major expense is in the actual drainage piece of it. So the question I asked was, and this actually came from our county folks, are some of these roads, the vast majority of these roads, could probably stay a 2-lane type of road. Doesn't need to be increased for capacity, because there's nothing left to build out. Let's take McLean and Veterans as an example. I mean, there's nothing left to add, to those areas for the most part. And so the real question is, could we get by with converting these concrete roads to 2 lanes concrete, leaving the open ditch? Our cost, probably half the cost in our CIP versus curb and gutter and the drainage. And so, that's really, and it's not necessarily for this year's budget, but as we move forward with the CIP, what does that look like? And, barring the legislature from being able to do, bond programs, we might be able to do some bond programming where we attack some of these roads sooner rather than later, not necessarily waiting for federal monies and all the hoops we have to go through there, impacting our PCI greatly, and because it's concrete, reducing our overall, need for and identifying those roads, and we don't have to go in with asphalt overlay and repair and all those kind of things. So just something to kind of look at, that we might be able to get a better bang for our buck doing it that way. But that's just going to mean an analysis to figure that out. But we might actually be able to drive our PCI up as opposed to keeping flat or just barely, keeping up with it. So just some thoughts. Any other questions, comments, concerns from council?
Mayor, thank you so much. Trent, you asked for priorities, and first of all, thank you for meeting with me on Wednesday. One thing I'll tell you about this budget, I think focus on trying to see where we can keep it to maintain the budget as it is without adding any more personnel. I know we talked about when we met about the unfilled positions that we have, and if we don't need them, how can we get that money back into the budget, use it somewhere else? Second thing I would ask, in the CVB fund, I'll echo what Mr. Koza said. We talked about the fund balance is several $1 million. Either we consider finding a way to tie it in to use it in Parks and Recs and help build some of these fields on the west side and putting them into turf fields, and maybe we can have more tournaments there and justify those costs. Or have a hard question and say, let's not charge 7% tax from the city perspective if we don't have a plan. And I would also challenge the Park and Rec to kind of look at your fee structure again. I know you guys did that last year, and I think you guys didn't do all of them, but I think some of them were, you said you were going to come back again and look at these fees. And to really, truly not just have a break-even point where you say, well, look, we're breaking even, but consider the cost of maintaining these facilities and how do we recoup those costs from the end user. And I think that's really important. And again, I'll tell you a personal story from my neighbor. They're very well-to-do, yet they love your kids' summer programs because they can't find anything as cheap to put their kids in there. And when you sell out in 3 minutes, there's a reason why these parents are jumping on these programs. And so I think you really need to don't be afraid, push the cost to these parents. They're willing to pay for it. And if you truly believe you're giving them the best programs, make money off it to cover some of your costs from some other places. So, I mean, again, it's these are my thoughts. I know you guys said, hey, this is an input session, so
Yep.
Just a thought.
All good comments. There's no bad comment today.
Appreciate that. And that is part of the plan for this fall when we adopt our new fees, that Parks and Rec is taking a hard look at those as we discussed when we increased the field uses fees.
Any other questions, comments? Trent, you guys have any follow-up?
So one of the things, we didn't delve into it, but one of the things that's a big challenge, not necessarily for FY26, but FY27 beyond, is Fire Station 7 personnel. We will be going for a SAFER grant again. We haven't gotten that the last couple of go-arounds. We'll be applying again. I think if we get that, it makes it easy moving forward. So maybe a little bit of input of if we don't get that SAFER grant, do we consider waiting another year to see if we can get the grant, or do we start looking at absorbing those costs in the FY27 budget, or at least some portion of that? It's a huge personnel impact, and so those SAFER grants, the most recent ones have covered 100% of our personnel cost for 3 years. We kind of expect that they'll go back to some sort of a match over those 3 years, but they do provide a significant amount of operational dollars to ramp up when we brought on new fire stations. So I don't know if there's any. It's not a 26 thing, but it's something we got to start thinking about. And as we get close to starting the final design on that station, and if we move forward with constructing it next year, I think that sets an expectation we will outfit and put the personnel in that station. So we've got to start thinking about that now. So.
Yep. Any other? Oh, Mr. Cousin.
Did I hear you right? You said we haven't gotten them in the past, or we have?
We have. I've probably said both, and I'm sorry.
Okay, well, that's. I was like, hold on, I thought we had, and I was like, maybe.
So we have, but the last couple of years where we've applied for them to specifically for this station coming online, we have not. So it's been, I think, probably 3 or 4 years since we've gotten one of those.
And just out of curiosity, was there any feedback why we have not for this one?
If Joel or Chief wants to weigh in, I think it's a matter of we've gotten them in the past, and then once you've gotten one, you kind of got to sit and wait for your opportunity again.
Yeah, I think one year we had some overlap with an existing program that was being funded, and these things are also formulaic. So I think, you throw the numbers in the system, and that initiates the process of putting you in comparison, excuse me, with other applicants. And, we just didn't make the cut there, but we'll continue to try that in the future.
Yeah, so you're just saying we went back to the well too quick, is what you're saying?
Possibly so, yes, sir.
Chief Taylor.
Also, just to add, Joel's right on point there. With the wheelhouse that they're in, really with that SAFER grant, we're just now about to get into the wheelhouse. With the construction being in 27, opening in 27, excuse me, that puts us in that wheelhouse really for this next FEMA grant. We really didn't feel comfortable with the last two that you would hit on those. Didn't surprise us we didn't get them. We would be looking to have a really good opportunity this coming FEMA grant. We're waiting to see what they do, federally, if they open that up and when they open that window up. Usually by this point, we've already opened it up and we're in that process of applying for it. So we're just waiting to get to that point right now. So it's just a wait and see.
So I think in conclusion, our schedule of how fast we move forward, maybe we see how well the grant process goes.
That's what I was going to say. I'd be willing to, depending on how it played out, that would kind of be the catalyst on which way we go.
Yeah, and Chief, just, for the public watching, anyone that might be here, how many personnel are we talking about?
Currently, we're on the SAFER grant. If we get that grant opportunity and they do the 100% for 3 years, which it has been in the past, we're looking at 24. That would be our 15 for the fire apparatus and the 9 for the ambulance in that station. Now, if we don't get the SAFER grant, that's going to cause more of a pressure on the city itself, so we'll need to reevaluate what we put in that station and when we start that. Matt, what we're talking about is when we put that ambulance in that station. So is that something we need initially, or can push that down a little bit? We'll need to look at that and monitor that. We know that, Massey Oaks is growing, and depending on how fast that grows, Station 7 will cover that area until that station came into play. So there's a few scenarios to look at there.
All right. Any other questions, comments?
Chief, real quick, which station is servicing that area that 7 would service? Is it kind of being picked up by
several?
Multiples?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Several. The closest really is Firehouse 2 on Fight Road, but they're looking at about a 10.5-minute response area just in the 7's district, and it'll be beyond 12.5 into 6's eventual district down there. So currently, Station 2, Station 3, Station 1 are the ones primarily we see running down into that area. Just depends on the availability and who's in and out of the stations at the time the emergency comes in.
And our current response time, you just said, is somewhere in the 12-minute range?
10.5, about 10. For instance, the most recent fire we had and the Fraser Road fire everybody's aware of, Station 2 was actually closer. They were actually at fire admin when they responded to that. And I believe they were about 10 minutes, 20 seconds, were they not, Chief Johnson? Is that correct? So about 10:20, 10:30, somewhere in that range is where they are currently, which, as you know, we want to be down below 7.5 at a maximum. So that's what we're trying to achieve.
With that increased population in the area coming, that would be the purpose behind 7.
Absolutely.
Get that response time down.
Yes.
Awesome. Thank you, sir.
And you and I live in 7. Just FYI.
I wasn't going to say that.
I'm going to.
Yeah, and I appreciate it.
I do as well. Thank you.
Just, yeah, FYI. Last call for questions, comments. Don't see any. Trent, y'all have wrap up?
So maybe just a wrap up. You know, we
Future dates?
continue to look at different things. I want to maybe get real specific on one that was mentioned earlier, which is the, you know, we've looked at that printing and budget, and I want to, you know, that includes the annual calendar. So annually, we've brought somebody on to help develop that. Print, you know, as many residents as we have, so 40,000 or so of those, and then mail those to every house within our community. It doesn't come without a cost, and I think, you know, with where we are with what people do with calendars these days, I receive a lot of them, and I look at the pictures, and then I use my calendar on my phone and my computer. So our thought was that so that there will still be some people that do want to receive that and see that. So developing it in-house, printing a much more moderate run of those, and then having those available in all of our public facilities, and comes with a pretty good price tag savings there. So that's the kind of things we're looking at, and just wanted to call that one out specifically since it was brought up, and wanted to make it real clear of what it was. So when people don't receive that at the end of the year, we will have them available and can print more if we have high demand.
What is the expenditure on that?
All told, with the printing and the mailing,
40, it's got to be over 100.
With printing, printing is roughly 48,000, and mailing is about $12,000.
60.
60.
So 60 overall.
Thank you.
We could take that down significantly, probably in the 10 range. Yeah. Say 50 grand. Like I said, what's important about that is we look at every single one of those types of expenses, you know, to see if it's something we can cut or, you know, modify it. So that's important. It's not just big expenses, it's the nickel and dimes at the end of the day.
and I think just one more comment. One of the other things we had in there was what we potentially could do with our FEMA lots. Mayor Cole brought a group to us to talk to us about that, and well, I really at this point have no idea of whether that's viable or something that can be done, but that's their business plan. And so I think if they can do that, and it means they maintain those things, and we no longer have that cost, then it's something we should look at. So
Yeah, and even if it's saving, you know, $30,000, $40,000, $50,000, that's $30,000 or $40,000, $50,000. I mean, it all adds up at the end of the day. So that's what's important. All right, with that, we will look at adjourning this workshop at 5:07.